Alright, so like I mentioned before, we have 5 types of salts in chemistry. We have normal salts, we have acid salts, we have basic salts, we have double salts, and we have complex salts. Alright, these are the 5 types of salts. So we've looked at normal salts. Alright, so the next type of salts that we'll be looking at is the acid salts. So, acid salts. What are acid salts? Acid salts are salts formed when the replaceable hydrogen ions in an acid are only partially replaced by a metal. Acid salts are formed when the replaceable hydrogen ions in an acid are only partially replaced by a metal. So examples of the acid salts are sodium hydrogen tetraoxosulfate 6, sodium dihydrogen tetraoxophosphate 5, sodium hydrogen tetraoxophosphate 5. These are examples of what? Of acid salts. These are examples of acid salts. And why are they acid salts? They are acid salts because the replaceable hydrogen ions in the acid are only partially replaced by a metal. Alright, so for instance, when tetraoxosulfate 6 acid H2SO4, when it reacts with a limited amount of sodium hydroxide, sodium hydrogen tetraoxosulfate 6 will be formed plus water. Alright, this is an example of an acid salt. Why is it an acid salt? It is an acid salt because in this acid we have 2 replaceable hydrogen ions. Alright, so out of these 2 replaceable hydrogen ions, only one hydrogen ion was replaced by a metal to form sodium hydrogen tetraoxosulfate 6. Alright, so that is why it is an acid salt. Again, acid salts are salts formed when the replaceable hydrogen ions in an acid are only partially replaced by a metal. So we still have hydrogen ion present in this salt. Alright, and that is why it is an acid salt. So when this sodium hydrogen tetraoxosulfate 6, which is an acid salt, when it reacts with sodium hydroxide, with another molecule of sodium hydroxide, sodium tetraoxosulfate 6 and water will be formed. Alright, this salt is an example of a normal salt. Alright, it is an example of a normal salt because all the replaceable hydrogen ion in the acid have been completely replaced by what? A metallic ion. Alright, so this sodium hydrogen tetraoxosulfate 6 is an example of what? Of an acid salt. Why is it an example of an acid salt? It's an example of an acid salt because it contains a replaceable hydrogen ion. Alright, so again, acid salts are salts formed when the replaceable hydrogen ions in an acid are only partially replaced by a metal. So we have 2 replaceable hydrogen ions here. It was partially replaced by only one sodium ion to form sodium hydrogen tetraoxosulfate 6. So we still have the presence of another hydrogen atom, and that is why it is called an acid salt. Alright, so it's very important that you know that an acid salt still contains replaceable hydrogen ion. So this is an acid salt, alright? It still contains a replaceable hydrogen ion and has acidic property. So this compound, this acid salt will have acidic property. For example, it turns blue litmus red. So this salt is able to turn blue litmus red. Alright? So again, acid salts are salts formed when the replaceable hydrogen ions in an acid are only partially replaced by a metal. Examples are sodium hydrogen tetraoxosulfate 6, sodium dihydrogen tetraoxophosphate 5, sodium hydrogen tetraoxophosphate 5. And it's very important that you should know that an acid salt still contains replaceable hydrogen ion. Very important. An acid salt still contains replaceable what? Hydrogen ion. So if you look at this compound, it's an acid salt. Why is it an acid salt? It still contains what? A replaceable hydrogen ion and has acidic property. For example, it can turn blue litmus red. So this substance can turn blue litmus red, all right? So how to identify an acid salt? Whenever you look at a salt, a compound, a salt, and you see hydrogen ion inside, it tells you that that salt is an acid salt, all right? So let's look at this question. Which of the following is an acid salt? Which of the following is an acid salt? So A, we have sodium chloride. B, we have sodium hydrogen tetraisosulfate 6. B, we have sodium tetraisosulfate 6. And D, we have potassium chloride. So potassium chloride is an example of what? A normal salt. This is a normal salt. Sodium hydrogen tetraisosulfate 6 is an example of an acid salt. So our answer is what? Is B, because it still contains a replaceable hydrogen ion. Alright, and that is why it is an acid salt. Sodium tetraisosulfate 6 is an example of a normal salt. And then potassium chloride is also an example of a normal salt. So the only acid salt we have here is option B, which is sodium hydrogen tetraisosulfate 6.